The goal that we have working with patients is how can we maximize our health span, the length of time that we're healthy. And the term that's being used for that now is anti-aging. We are all chronologically aging at the same rate, but we biologically age at a different rate. And the meaning that I have behind that is that you look at two people that are 80 years old, some are here, some aren't there, right? So the idea is how can we slow down the speed with which we're changing over time? And this is something that we have been very successful at doing, but we've been doing it on a one-on-one basis. So our goal with this pilot program that we have now is how can we turn this into something that is easier to distribute on a larger scale, because much of the information that we're going over is the same stuff time after time after time. So if we can combine that together and deliver it in one fell swoop, and then individualize everybody's approach, it makes it much more impactful. And that's essentially what we're doing. So your engagement with us is going to be invaluable for our ability to deliver this information in a concise manner, and giving us the feedback really helps. The way that we work is by increasing your body's ability to handle changes that occur through life in mediating stressors. Stress is what causes us to decay more quickly, and the stressors that we're talking about are really threefold. In chiropractic we call it the 3 T's, but it's our physical stressors, our traumas. Those might be micro traumas or macro traumas. A micro trauma would be a repetitive activity over time. We're seeing quite a number of people who are experiencing thumb problems because we're constantly on our phones this way, right? Or neck problems because we're constantly on our phones this way. So these are micro traumas, long term. When we talk about a macro trauma, that's a fall down a flight of stairs. It's one big. So the traumas are a stressor that we have. The second one that we talk about, the second T, are our toxins. And toxins are generally environmental exposure. And when I say environmental exposure, things that we're putting on, in, or exposing our bodies to. So we might have toxins in the form of the foods we're eating, or the things that we're putting in our mouth, chewing and swallowing that we call food, like a Twinkie, or or diet soda, or the energy drink. So these are toxins to us. They might be heavy metals that we're getting. They might be associated with fillings in our mouth, or dyes we're using in our hair, or any of the other things that we're doing. Maybe the air we're breathing. Right. We could even talk about toxins in the form of the food we're eating. The plastics in the fish. Right. So all these are toxins. I'm going to go back to the trauma, the physical trauma again, just because I neglected to talk about trauma to the body in a physical sense. Sunlight exposure creating a burn or thermal energy, right? So these are, and then the third are our thoughts, and that's the third T. So it's traumas, toxins, and thoughts. And our thoughts are our emotional stressors that we have, and as humans, we're built to handle emotional stress on a incident by incident basis, right? So we're sitting around the campfire. Oh my gosh, there's some wolves. Let's get together. Let's deal with the stress. The wolves go away, and we're back to a lower stress. Now, there were some degrees of moderate stresses that happened. I didn't live back then, but we can imagine that there were some. But in today's lifestyle that we have, the number of chronic stressors that we have is very, very high. We are dealing with, on a day-to-day basis, social media stressors. We're dealing with a significant degree of geopolitical stressors. We have financial stressors. We have time-restricted stressors. We're on the road, we're driving stressors, plus our regular stressors. And then we're also facing a significant degree of loneliness as humans as compared to where we used to be hundreds and thousands of years ago. We're very communal creatures, and the more that we're engaging in social living with friendly people on the internet, we don't really have friends as much as we have friendlies as much. So these are all stressors that cause changes in the body. The body has to deal with these stressors by rebuilding, repairing, and armoring itself against the stressors. So the more that we're able to do that and stop these constant attacks and barrage to the system, the more that we're able to slow down the biological degradation that happens with aging. The more that we're able to arm ourselves with resources that allow for rebuilding and repairing in face of these stressors, slows down the biological aging. And we've found that there are really only 4 things that we can do from a standpoint of by ourselves taking action going forward. In the office in chiropractic, we talk about 5 things. Then the 5th being the communication system of the body, the neurological system, the autonomic and the peripheral nervous system, maximizing the functionality of the nervous system, particularly through the spine and through the joints and the function of the body, so that the communication system works really well. And we do that, chiropractically. You need some assistance and help that way through a chiropractor. But there are 4 things that you can do on your own. And the first one that we talk about is our D, diet. Diet is one that we will focus on, not only making sure that we're taking good foods in, but preventing us from eating harmful foods. This is a major component for our anti-aging program. The second component, we talk about repair. Sometimes I'll write the word rest in there because rest is easy to understand, but that's when we repair, is during our rest. That's when we recuperate. That's when we regenerate. That's when we recover, and the body's ability to fix and heal. The third one that we're going to put up here is our exercise. And exercise is one where we talk about our movement, where we talk about strength, dexterity, coordination, balance. The big term that we use here is mobility. And mobility is, we define that as strength through range. So you can be strong but have minimal range, or have good range but not. So strength through range is our exercise. And then the 4th one that we work on in this program is mental health. And mental health can be defined in many, many different ways, in many, many different terms. But our focus for mental health is really working on decreasing those stressors that might happen in the body and improving your ability to have focus, improving your ability to have mental calmness, improving your ability to have purpose and direction and sense of community. And these will have a dramatic and almost immediate impact on your body's ability to maintain health and well-being, right? So we're going to focus on each of these individual components for you as they pertain to your individual needs, but there are many things that we focus on that are global in nature. We start our program with discussing dietary habits. And dietary habits are the one that we focus on in the beginning because, one, it is the most impactful that we found, because it's generally the one that our patients have the most need for help and well-being. In addition, if you're not eating well and your gut isn't healthy, everything else becomes more challenging. If your gut doesn't feel good, it's harder to exercise. If your gut doesn't feel good, it's harder to have mental focus. If your gut doesn't feel good, it's harder to recover and repair and rest. So we really like to focus on the gut in the beginning. And I'm going to hit a couple salient points. The very first one is going to be associated with understanding where you are as far as your diet. And I'm going to ask you a question. I ask everybody the question, and 98% of the time I get the same type of response. So if I interrupt you during your response, please do not judge me. It's just part of what. So, what does your diet look like?
My current diet is pitiful. I'm living on takeout Mexican food right now. Just, it's very bad.
Okay. Is there anything else you're eating?
Protein drinks.
Right. So there's a lot of room for improvement there.
There's a ton of room for improvement.
Yeah. So ordinarily, and you did hit a little bit, but not that much. Ordinarily, when I do ask people what their diet's like, they begin to express judgment on their diet. And you did a little bit. You said it needs improvement. It's a terrible diet. And
it's not balanced in any way.
Yeah, it's not balanced in any way. When I do ask, what does your diet look like? The response that I'm looking for would be the same type of response of, what type of a car do you have? You would then say, oh, well, it's a red one. It's a Honda. It's an Accord. It's got a strobe light on the inside. It's the front fender is dented. So you describe the car. If I asked you, what's your home like? Oh, it's a 3-bedroom raised ranch. We would describe that. When we talk about our diet, oftentimes the very first place we go to is defending, judging, or somehow grading our diet. And I'd like you to work in terms of understanding your diet. When I ask what your diet is like, and again, I'm not attacking, it's just because I see this over and over. When I ask you what's your diet like, what I'm looking for is, well, on a daily basis, I'm eating a burrito that has chicken, cheese, and broccoli. I wake up with a large coffee, follow that by 3 monster drinks, 2 oranges, and then a handful of pecans. Whatever your diet might be. The reason for that is the more that we understand exactly what we're taking in, instead of worrying about judging and feeling uncomfortable and discussing, the more that we're able to understand what we take in, the more we're able to understand a path towards success. The example that I give with this with patients, if I ask, well, if we want to go to Miami, we're in Palm Beach Gardens now, if we want to go to Miami, how do we travel there? You'd say, well, get on I-95 and head south, right? But if I asked you that same question and you were in Cuba, how would we get there? Well, get on a boat, head north, right? So the nature of our starting point determines the direction in which we travel. And the nature of where you start dietary-wise is going to determine how you change. The first thing that I'd like you to do, and I'm going to give you a couple of action steps that I'd like you to take immediately, is I'd like you to start taking pictures of all your foods. We have on the Practice Better app, we have a lifestyle coaching that allows you to enter in all your dietary choices. We have some patients that really love to go into the nitty-gritty and enter every food they're eating and break it down. I had a half a teaspoon of mayonnaise, it was Hellmann's, it was, I had this, and some people do that. Most I find don't, because it's, again, we talked about that mental burden of just things, right? It will take some work, and this is not a passive program. There is an active component to this program, but if you just take pictures of your food and you enter them into the Practice Better, it doesn't take more than a minute a day. We've taken your pictures, it takes a little bit of time to do that. You get onto the Practice Better app, just upload the pictures for the foods that day. Now we have a track record of what you've been eating, and based on the picture, we can usually define what it is you've been eating. And that's a great start to understanding what it is you're putting in your mouth, chewing and swallowing. Because those tissues, when we talk about the rebuilding, the repairing, those tissues are using the resources, the supplies, based on what it is you're putting into your mouth. And if I only deliver styrofoam and Elmer's glue to a work site, I can't build a palatial estate or a skyscraper. If I'm delivering concrete and high quality steel, we're going to build a different structure, right? And that's it. Regarding our diet, The second component that I'd like you to be aware of is how we define processed foods and how we define ultra-processed foods, how we define a whole food, how we define a plant-based food, right? So these are catch-all terms that you can hear on any sort of podcast, news source, videos from YouTube where they talk about, oh, what's my healthy, clean diet? Processed food, ultra-processed food, plant source, plant-based, paleo, vegan. These are all terms that conjure some sort of a mental picture for you. For our purposes, we're going to discuss a ultra-processed food, a processed food, and a whole food in these three concepts. An ultra-processed food is a food substance that you would, and I use a term there, specifically a food substance that you, that you would not ordinarily be able to find in 17th century Paris, right? The plains of the Americas in the past. You wouldn't have been able to get a Twinkie then. We wouldn't have been able to have hydrogenated oils or ultra refined sugar or enriched flour. When we change something mechanically and chemically, that's going to be an ultra-processed food. A non-processed food technically is something that hasn't been processed at all. So the only ability to get a non-processed food would be if I went out to an apple orchard, and because if I take the apple off the tree, I'm now processing it a little bit. I've removed it from it, so I'd have to bring the branch down and right. So there's some degree of processing in all of our foods. If you could take that food as a whole food source, right? So technically we take the apple off the tree, that's some processing, but we're going to consider that whole food source. And the way that we recognize a whole food is a food that if I look at it, I can tell what it is and where it was from. A potato looks like a potato. A potato chip, for all I know, might have been made of sawdust, right? We can't tell. I can look at a chicken breast. If I look at chicken sausage, I don't know if that was ground up bugs. I don't know. But a chicken breast looks like a chicken breast. So if I can identify that food as it's still an integrated food source, it's not been disintegrated, right? That's now for us, for our thought process, that's a whole food, okay? A processed food that's acceptable for us is a food that we could take and make in our kitchen that would be from a whole food source. So for instance, if I wanted to make flour in my kitchen, well, I could get whole corn, I could get whole wheat berry, I could get whole rye, and I could get a grinder and I could grind that flour up, and now I have whole flour, right? Because I'm mechanically changing it in my kitchen. I don't know really how I would take that flour and remove the fiber and remove the protein and just keep the carbohydrate and then re-enrich it. That's not something that we could easily do in our kitchen, right? So that is going to be a mechanical processing. That is what we're going to consider to be an okay type of processing. I can take tomatoes and make crushed tomatoes or tomato paste in my kitchen. I don't know how to make ketchup in my kitchen. There's a whole process of adding in maybe high fructose corn syrup and things like we just don't know how to do in the kitchen. So when we talk about processed foods, this is our definition of processed foods. These are going to be foods that are okay. Any ultra processed food, I want you to completely eliminate from your diet. It's something that will take some time, it's something that will take some effort, and it's something that's going to be very important to do. This is going to be the number one first activity that I'd like you to engage in. I can show you here. Do you have any questions about processed food or ultra processed food or okay? Let's see if I can find it here quite readily. I see that you are drinking an ultra processed drink this morning, and let's see. Just give me a moment, and no, wrong one. Okay, so these are examples of whole foods are not ultra processed, found in packages or boxes filled with additives, right? So when we look at this here, a processed food and a whole food, start to get comfortable with identifying what is whole, what is processed. When we look here, it's still in its natural form, identifiable, recognizable, cellular structure is intact. We can discuss how nothing bad was added. It doesn't include sugars, chemicals, refined oils, preservatives, or refined foods. When we talk about whole foods, these are fruits, these are vegetables. These are foods that are beans and legumes, whole, intact, unrefined grains. We can see nuts and seeds and mushrooms, spices and herbs. It's a very important component for what we eat are spices and herbs. Chicken, fish, meat. We can talk about the sources of all of these, whether they're organic, whether they're heirloom, grass-fed. In the future, we will. But right now, just like identifying and recognizing what is and what isn't. Eggs and dairy. These are what also we would consider to be whole food type. Just because you're eating plant-based doesn't mean you're always eating whole food, right? We know like the Beyond Burger, right? That's plant-based, but it's not a whole food, right? Whole food, plant-based means foods that comes from a whole plant. That's how we're going to define our plant-based. That it's coming from a whole plant. Some varieties of whole foods. These are generally recognized as whole food. Now, here's olive oil. There's some processing that goes into olive oil, but olive oil you could make in your kitchen. You take olives, you squish them down, you make olive. Here's some dark chocolate, and I think that's coconut oil. I'm not so sure. But there's some degree. Here's a smoothie. That's fruits and vegetables that were mechanically mashed. Right? These are ultra processed, not whole food, but they're all plant based. Right? So all of these foods are all plant based, but they are certainly not health giving types of foods. When we look at plant based whole food versus plant based not whole food. Right, you can recognize things here, like Oreos are totally plant-based, but it's very difficult to make good, healthy eyes and livers and lungs out of an Oreo. We're not going to debate the deliciousness of them, right? But we're going to debate the health-giving benefits of them, right? When we look at a food, if it's in a package that has a label, there's a chance that it's not a whole food, right? When I buy bananas, there's no label on the banana, right? When you go to the grocery store, you buy cut up cantaloupe. There's no label on the cut up cantaloupe. We don't have to put labels. When we start processing, that's added sugar. That's a huge one that we look for. If there's anything with added sugar, we know that it's been processed. We can look. There's a bit of a comparison here on both. These are whole foods. These are not whole foods. These are, we consider them junk foods, we consider them clean foods, right? We can talk about how ultra-processed foods do include everything that's on here. Now, we talked a little bit about butter and cheese. Those might not be ultra-processed because everything is on a spectrum, right? And these are just some pictures that I got. Not everything is a perfect picture. Generally, again, recognized as a whole food. Generally recognized as whole food delicious. We're going to talk about how these French fries, what type of processing is in them, what type of processing is in the potato, what type of processing is here. We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for doing better all the time, and we don't want perfection to be the enemy of the good, right? So if November is better than October, that's success. And if December is better than November, that's success. Because again, we live and operate and work on a spectrum. Whole food can be convenient. It's definitely pricier to buy cut up fruits already made and prepackaged salads already made. But if it's a difference between getting it done and not getting it done, I always err on the side of getting it prepackaged. Now there's a whole host of, oh my gosh, the plastic and the litter and the processing and what's the nature. I mean, we can go down tons of rabbit holes. The expense that you're going to be incurring getting something more processed cut up for you is higher, but we generally say that for every $1 you spend on your health through a dietary component, that's $3 you save on your health through a medical intervention. Right, so it's a cost savings some foods seem like whole food, right? So olive oil isn't a whole food as compared to an olive. Orange juice isn't a whole food compared to an orange, right? We're going to talk about the health-giving benefits of olive oil, but one of the challenges with the oil is that it's a high-calorie food. For some patients, we consider caloric intake to be important, especially if we're trying to manage weight. If we're not managing weight, we're not as concerned. Processing, again, is on a spectrum. Food processing alters food from its natural state for flavor or for preservation. So an apple slice is less than apple juice, but apple cinnamon crunch cereal is more processed than an apple juice. So where on the spectrum are we? And this graph isn't necessarily the end all be all, but it gives you an idea of what we're looking at. Vegan means excluding animal products, and I put this in here because a lot of people are like, oh, I got to be vegan. It describes what you don't eat, and we talked a little bit about your diet before, how we judge our diet. What we want to do is we want to eat lots of whole plants. That's where we're going to get the best bang for our buck from a health standpoint. Lots of whole plants. A whole food-based diet minimizes the negative health effects associated with the standard American diet. And the standard American diet, or the SAD diet, S-A-D, standard American diet, SAD diet, is poor dietary choices that lead to obesity, that leads to inflammation, leads to mental depression changes, reduced physical activity, poor dietary, and just goes around and around and around. Here's our R. Our rest is impaired. Our D, our diet, is impaired. Here we have our mental health is impaired, and all of this causes us to have less activity, particularly because of the inflammation. So again, our D, our diet, rest, exercise, we were able to address all of them just with the dietary change alone. If you can't do 100% whole food based, aim for 90. If you can't do 90, aim for 80. If you can't do 80, aim for 70. Then it continues on in that direction. First, understand what's a whole food. Understand what is processed and what isn't. Second, begin to identify whole foods in stores and in restaurants. And third, incorporate whole foods into your diet. That's the very first action step I would like you to take this week. What we're going to do, I think that's the last. Oh yeah, we're going to talk about fiber at a later time. What I'd like you to do is action step until the next time we engage with each other, which is going to be a couple days from now. I'd like you to, 1, start taking pictures of all the food you're doing, and 2, start identifying, okay, and if you go home and eat nothing today but Twinkies and Monster drinks, I'm not judging you. This is a non-judgment zone. I'm working with you. I'm working for you. You're working with yourself. You're working for yourself. And I'm not going to grade you during the process. But what I will do is I will hold you to task as much as you want to be held to task, okay? And if you have any questions, like, is this a whole food? Is this not a whole food? Just start examining what it is you're putting in your mouth and swallowing. Examine what's in your cabinet. Examine the aisles you go down in the grocery store. Examine the places you're visiting for picking up fast foods when you're going out. I'm going to, Tacos El Carbone for my burrito. Could I go to Tacos El Carbone 2, and that burrito seems to be made with a whole wheat flour. They put more vegetable in there, and the cheese they have on top is organic. Okay, you know what? It's a shift. How can we shift? Okay, based on what I've just gone over, I'm done with today's presentation for you. But based on what I've just gone over, I'd like to open it up to a question answer period for you. Are there any things that I've gone over that are unclear? Is there anything that you wanted to add? Anything you wanted to subtract? Any response or statements you want to make back?
No, I think I'm actually very familiar with this whole concept and the whole like processed food. I really, aside from that,
Mm-hmm.
this is the biggest. The Rockstar energy drinks are probably the only ultra processed thing in my house.
Right.
I don't eat. Basically, when I go to the grocery store, like I don't go into the inner sanctum of the aisle because there's really nothing in there that I.
That's where all the fun lives.
Yeah, but I don't actually.
And the bad parts.
I don't like most of the stuff. Like
Yeah.
I don't eat sweets. I don't naturally not gravitate to them.
Yeah.
And so like once every 2 or 3 months, I'll go to like Doris and get a gelato. Yeah, like but that's really it. Like packaged stuff. I have some stuff like hurricane prep, so I can like like whip up if I need to.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I don't eat it.
Good.
Like even the burritos, it's like taco chula.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Yeah, I know
like,
taco chula.
fresh. They started those things with whole ingredients for the most part. Like,
Yeah.
Right. I just don't like junk food,
Yeah.
and really the energy drinks are like going to be the hardest thing to kill.
So then let's go over the getting rid of the energy drinks is really an important thing. It's really an important thing because it changes your metabolic state in a very negative way. Right. So let's talk about the. I'm not
Sorry,
totally
I'm
not.
thirsty.
Yeah. I'm not.
Don't look.
And again, I'm not judging you, but it does change your metabolic state in a very negative way. So let's talk about the fiber addendum and the whole plants providing fiber because this is something that might have value and impact for you as well.
So before we do that, the one question one thing that I.
Yeah.
This is kind of long. So there's some mental stuff in here.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple years ago, I got divorced.
Mm-hmm.
Tons of like stressor factors around it. They're mostly financial.
Yeah.
But I'm also working almost 2 full-time jobs to keep like the house and the dogs and the whole thing going. So there's a lot of my food choices lately have been just time restricted. So
Yeah.
like I need to figure out a better way to balance my schedule. Like I actually love to cook.
So
But
it requires
Kind
so.
of gotten away from that.
So let's go down a little bit of a different direction here. The success with this, and then we're gonna hold off till the next one. But the success with creating meals at home starts and stops with being a food prepper, and there is no there's no substitute for prep for food preparation. You can have a full-time cook in your house that's preparing food for you all the time. That's food prep. You have somebody, but it is essential that you become a prepper because there are 2 components that exist. One, you have a very specific palate. There are foods that you like to eat and there are foods that you don't like to eat. And if you don't have the foods that you like to eat available, you're going to choose something that's going to be quick, made outside the home or somewhere else. The second thing is there are certain foods that are necessary for your health. And if you don't prep those foods, the chances of you finding them in an abundant manner outside of the house are very small. There might be like a restaurant here, but it's very difficult. So the food prep is an essential component. And if it takes you 45 minutes every day to do it, you might not have that 45 minutes on a Tuesday, a Thursday, and a Sunday, right? How do I get around that? And we're going to talk about food prep, and we're going to talk about how we can make that successful. I do it all the time. I'm constantly food prepping, and it's something that I enjoy doing, but it's also something that I even more enjoy the action of after it's done because now I have all this prepped food. So this is going to be associated with our next phase. So after you've started taking pictures of your food, after you've figured out, okay, I know what whole foods are, I know what they are, what am I now looking at as my 5 favorite meals? What am I going to be thinking about if I can only eat 5 meals a week, and most of us only eat a half a dozen meals a week anyway, right? So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. If I were going to eat a different meal every day, what would those 5 meals look like? Make a list of those, and then we'll get that prep in there too. All right.
Yeah, that's great. When I do cook,
Yeah.
I cook like for 5 people, and then
And then freeze it. Yeah.
Right. And then
that's for
and then
prep.
like what happens is like I get through all that, and then I'm like off.
So we'll talk about how to do that.
Yeah,
We'll talk about
it's just not being consistent.
All right, this was really good.
Well,
I'm going to stop this here.